We often wonder about our place in the scheme of things. What are the grand forces of nature and science and history that have brought us to this pass? Bill Gates called this man's course his most favorite in all time. Imagine mixing physics, chemistry, dinosaurs, DNA, everything you can think of, and mash it together, and you have a morning class with David Christian. This morning, he's going to take us from the Big Bang to the internet, 13.7 billion years of history and the universe in a haiku. Please welcome David Christian.
Me, myself, boarding here.
Us and we, interesting hair.
Internet है तो friendship है.
Friendship है तो sharing है.
जो मेरा है वो तेरा है, जो तेरा है वो मेरा, जो मेरा है वो तेरा है, जो तेरा है वो मेरा.
और फ्रेंडशिप की शेयरिंग को हमेशा ऑन रखें एयरटेल इंटरनेट.
It's a great honor to be here, and I'm very grateful to be invited, and I loved the talks I heard yesterday, so I'm hoping I can present something that's of interest to you. This lovely kid here is my grandson, Daniel, and the person holding him is his minder, otherwise known as my son, Joshua. Now, I'm an educator, and as an educator, you spend a lot of time thinking, am I talking about the things that my students need to know? So here's the question that obsesses me. What knowledge will Daniel and his friends need when they grow up? He and his friends are going to face huge, complex, sometimes dangerous global challenges of a type that my generation didn't face. Will they cope with global threats such as climate change, energy shortage, nuclear proliferation, declining biodiversity, increasing inequalities? Will they learn how to work together across many different countries and many different cultures? They will need, in order to do this, an understanding of both the sciences and the humanities. They'll need an education that takes them right across the spectrum, from the hard sciences to the humanities. They'll also need a sense of scale, because the big global changes of the next century are going to happen at multiple scales. To understand climate change, you need to understand things that happen on scales of a few months, but also billions of years. And they'll also need a sense of global processes and global relations. So, back to my question. What sort of education will Daniel and his friends need if they're to cope with the huge challenges of the 21st century? Well, I want to suggest an answer. Daniel and his generation will need an education that includes what I call big history. And this talk is about big history. Big history is a global story. It shows how everything fits together. It's a story that links cosmology, physics, biology, history, economics, sociology, you name it. It links them all together seamlessly. And by doing so, it provides a sort of map of modern knowledge. And that map will provide Daniel and his generation with a framework to help them understand their place in the cosmos and on this earth. So here's the structure of this talk, so you'll know, this is a sort of map of this talk, so you'll know where we are. I'm going to talk first about what big history is and try to define it. And then I'm going to give you a 15-minute course in big history. Then I want to talk briefly about the Big History Project, which is bringing big history courses to high schools, eventually, I hope, throughout the world. And finally, I want to talk very briefly about why I think big history is such powerful pedagogical medicine. So first, what is big history, and how did we get there? I find it helps if I begin personally with how I got to big history. So I'm a Russian historian. I actually lived as a student in what was then called Leningrad in the time of Brezhnev. And during the Cold War, teaching about Russian and Soviet history seemed to me pretty important. I thought I'm teaching my students something they need to know. I was talking about the dark side, in a sense. It was also exciting for me because it fulfilled a sort of adolescent love affair with the Russian literature, the Russian spirit, all things Russian. I began doing research inspired by the great French historians of the Annales school, such as Fernand Braudel. And Fernand Braudel encouraged us to look not just at the great people of history, but at ordinary people, at peasants, at material, what he called material life. And I began studying the life of the 19th century Russian peasantry. We had 2 young kids at the time. So questions like, how did you support a baby during a time of famine, really interested me, and they seemed urgent. So I studied the food and drink, but then I found that the drink was particularly interesting. Of course, the main drink was vodka. And what I found was that the Russian government in the 19th century, and remember, this is a 19th century superpower, got 40% of its revenue from the sale of vodka, from a mind-altering substance. Now, what this means is that one of the world's superpowers would have collapsed if people had stopped drinking vodka, if the Russian peasantry had stopped drinking vodka. So that made vodka really interesting. And the subject took me on a tour of Russia's villages, its churches, its taverns, and its government offices. And so that was wonderful. That was lots of fun. But as a teacher, I had this increasing obsession. Was Russian history what my students really needed to know? Wasn't I really teaching a sort of tribalism? I was teaching my students about one of the human tribes. Shouldn't I be teaching them about the whole of humanity? Shouldn't I be teaching the whole of history? Well, then I thought, can you teach the whole of human history? To teach that, well, you need to talk about how humans evolved. And I thought, that's taking me into biology, and I'm not a biologist. And then I thought, but to do that properly, I have to talk about how human life evolved, how life evolved over 4 billion years on the history of the Earth. And to do that, I have to talk about the creation of the Earth. Now I'm in geology. And to do that, I have to talk about the creation of the universe. So I hope you see where this is going. It turned out that if I wanted to teach my students a history of humanity, I had to teach them the history of everything, which seemed doolally at the time for a historian. Seemed completely crazy. So, big career decision. Should I stay with the Russian peasants? This was fun, this was safe, this was ordinary academic work. But in 1989 at Macquarie University in Sydney, where I taught, we needed a new first-year course. And somehow, you know what, your hands sometimes do this when you don't. My hand went up, and I said, I'll teach a course on the history of everything. And I was committed to doing it. And I thought, this is a big mistake. But now I had to do it. So I phoned up colleagues in different parts of the university, colleagues in astronomy, geology, biology, and I was saying things like, do you think you could give a lecture to my first-year students summarizing your entire discipline in 45 minutes? And luckily, a few of them agreed. So with a wonderful team of colleagues, we put together a course covering all of time since the origins of the universe. And it turned out to be even more fun than researching vodka. And remarkably, it turned out to be doable. The students loved it, even though the students knew that for the first 2 or 3 years, we didn't know what we were doing. We hadn't a clue. But after several years, we began to get the hang of it. So that's how I got into big history. So what is big history? Here's a definition from the website of the recently established International Big History Association. Big history is the attempt to understand in a unified, interdisciplinary way the history of cosmos, Earth, life, and humanity. One way of thinking about this is that big history is fractal. We had a wonderful lecture on the patterns you see in mathematics yesterday. And here are the patterns I see. They are fractal. Big history looks at the past at multiple scales, and it sees eerie similarities between all these scales. Here's another perspective. My wife knows a lot about Jung. And I started teaching this course very naively, and she said, you know what you're doing? You're teaching a creation myth, an origin story. And that idea has become very powerful for me. So I think of big history as a modern origin story, a unified history of the universe, the Earth, and humanity on the basis of modern scientific scholarship. Now, like all origin stories, big history is extraordinarily powerful. And it's powerful because it gives you a map that fits everything together and shows how you fit into the scheme of things. It offers a new perspective. It's a bit like seeing the Earth from space. There's a wonderful book by Kevin Kelly called Home Planet. It has beautiful pictures from space, combined with quotations from, I believe there are about 200 people alive now who've actually seen the Earth from space. They all had the same sort of epiphany, and this too was mentioned in a talk yesterday. And here's just one example. It's from Sultan bin Salman Al Saud. He was the first Arab astronaut, and he flew on the shuttle Discovery in 1985, and this is what he said. The first day or so, we all pointed to our countries. That's the tribal vision. The third or fourth day, we were pointing to our continents. the perspective is widening. By the fifth day, we are aware of only one Earth. And I think what big history can do, it's a beautiful statement, and I think what big history can do is give students that epiphany without having to rocket them into space. So here's this Van Gogh painting, which I love. What I see in it, and I'm sure Van Gogh didn't, is humans trying to place themselves in the universe. So this is why I take this as an iconic image of what we're doing. Okay, now is the hard work, the 15-minute course in big history, and there will be a test at the end. Okay. Let's begin with a conceptual toolkit. I found a number of core ideas hold this story together very well. These are key concepts in the big history courses I teach. 4 key ideas. The first is the idea of increasing complexity. The early universe was simple. Then slowly more complex things appeared, from stars to planets to life to the staggeringly complex society we see around us today. Second idea, Goldilocks conditions. Complex things don't just appear throughout the universe. They appear in particular times and places where the conditions are just right. Not too hot, not too cold, not too big, not too small. And that's what I mean by Goldilocks conditions. And the surface of a rocky planet like our Earth turns out to be full of these Goldilocks conditions. Third, the idea of emergence. These new things, when they appear, always seem magical, because something seems to appear that didn't exist before. It's created by assembling things that already did exist into new patterns with new emergent properties. So emergence is the third idea. And the fourth is the idea of thresholds. These new things appear at what I call threshold moments. They often appear quite suddenly. So let's put these all together. Complex things have appeared over 13 billion years, more and more complex things, step by step. They have new emergent qualities. So the universe itself acquires new qualities as they appear. They appear only where the conditions are just right, where you get Goldilocks conditions, and they appear at threshold moments. So we can think of threshold moments as doorways to something new. Okay, that's the kit. Here are the 8 main thresholds that I talk about. The first is the creation of the universe itself, 13.7 billion years ago. The second is the creation of the first stars, probably about 200 million years later. That's the date astronomers are zeroing in on. With stars, suddenly the universe is more complex. You get these little hot spots dotted through the universe. Then the appearance of chemical elements. New chemical elements were manufactured inside dying stars. And then the appearance of planets. We know lots of planets are around, but our Earth appeared 4.5 billion years ago. So we'll zoom in on our Earth at this point. Now, please notice, what we've done is this story has taken us seamlessly from cosmology to astronomy to physics to chemistry and now to geology. Then we talk about life, so it's taken us to biology. The first life probably appeared about 3.8 billion years ago on our planet. And then we talk about human beings. Now, this is a really interesting point. Do human beings deserve to be classified as a threshold? Is our appearance an important event in the history of the planet? I will argue that the answer is yes. Our appearance is a very important moment on geological scales. Our 7th threshold is the appearance of agriculture, and the 8th is the appearance of modern human societies about 200 years ago. And now you see we've crossed from the sciences into the humanities. And once again, these transitions happen seamlessly within the story of big history. And then, where's the next threshold? My students push me to talk about the future. So once we've got to the present day, we ask, where's it all going? And my students are dying to ask that question. What's going to happen in the next 50 or 100 years? What's going to happen to the planet? What's going to happen to the universe? Okay, equipped with these ideas, let's survey 13.7 billion years in 10 minutes. Now, to give you a feeling for timescales, because our minds are not designed to deal with 1 billion years or 1 million years. If anyone tells you they can imagine those numbers, they're lying. We can't. We're not designed to do that. We can imagine 13 years. So let's divide everything by 1 billion, and I'm going to give you some of these dates as if the universe was created 13 years ago. Okay, so we begin by winding the timeline back 13.7 billion years to time 0. I want to leave you in the dark to give you a sense for this. Around us, there is nothing. Absolutely nothing. There's not even time or space. This is as empty as we can possibly conceive of. And then suddenly, bam! A universe appears. It's tinier than an atom. It's incredibly hot and incredibly dense. Thank you for that. It's expanding at warp speed. It contains everything that's in our universe. All the energy, all the planets, all the stars, every atom that's in our universe. And it's tinier than an atom. We've crossed our first threshold, the Big Bang, and we have ourselves a universe. But it's quite simple. Here's a pie chart of the elements you could find in it. 75% hydrogen, 25% helium. That's it. This is very simple, this early universe. There are clouds of hydrogen and helium atoms distributed pretty randomly. There are photons of light. There's also dark energy and dark matter, which I'm not going to talk about because no one really understands them, and they seem not to play a role in the story anyway. There are no galaxies and stars, there are no heavier chemical elements, there are no planets, no living organisms, no human societies. And then, over 13.7 billion years, more complex things appeared. Now, let's be clear, most of the universe today is very simple. If I picked you up and threw you randomly somewhere in the universe, the odds are overwhelming that you would arrive somewhere that's empty, cold, and vacuum, and you would die very quickly. But we live on this strange place, the surface of a rocky planet, where the Goldilocks conditions are just right for complexity. So more and more complex things have appeared over 13.7 billion years. Here's our second threshold, stars. With stars, suddenly the universe is more complex. You've got these hot spots, you've got flows of energy, you've got flows of gravitational energy, and the universe is already more complex. And stars themselves create the third threshold. They manufacture new elements. I love this slide. Let's see. Right at the center is the star. It's the size of a pixel. And what it's doing is it's spewing out carbon and other elements into space around it. So it's filling the space between stars with new elements. And here's another picture of the same process, the Helix Nebula, 700 light years from Earth in Aquarius. And this is how the periodic table is built up. So here's the story of the periodic table in 20 seconds. Hydrogen and helium are created in the Big Bang. Elements up to iron are created in dying stars. Some higher elements are also created in dying stars through a process called neutron capture. And then the rest of the elements in the periodic table are created in supernova explosions when a huge star blows up at the end of its life. So now we have a universe that's more complex chemically, so you can do more things with it. Here's a pie chart of today's universe and the elements in it. Still almost 75% hydrogen, about 23% helium, and that other 2% that you can see in there, whoa, sorry, I'm pressing the wrong button here. There is all the other elements. So we have these other elements, and the universe is more chemically complex, so you can make more things, including planets. So threshold 4 is the creation of the solar system 4.5 billion years ago. On our imaginary timescale, that's about 4.25 years ago. Okay. I love this picture. It's from the Cassini satellite. It's not an artist's recreation, it's a photograph. And there's a sort of mystery in it. There's a tiny white dot here. I'm not sure if you can see it, but I'm sure you can guess what it is. It's us. And I love the way that big history can give us this sort of sudden shock of insight into our own place in the universe. Now, our Earth is very strange. The rocky planets, the mixture of chemicals is utterly different. Here's the pie chart. You'll see it's about 46% oxygen. I think that's 27% silicon, aluminum. Where have the hydrogen and helium gone? They've been driven away by the solar sun. So the surface of the Earth is much more chemically rich than Jupiter or Saturn or the sun. And that's why the Earth is more complex than any of these things. And the result is we now have the Goldilocks conditions for great chemistry, and that allows the creation of life. This is what the early Earth looked like, probably, but once it cooled down a bit, then we got life, 3.8 billion years ago. Now, that's 3.5 years ago on our imaginary timescale. For 2 billion years, life consists of single-celled organisms, but don't think they were simple. During that period, what was evolving was all the biochemical machinery that makes our bodies work. So a lot was going on in that period. 600 million years ago, the first multi-celled organisms. This slide, by the way, was done by a student of mine in big history, Martin Schuler. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and I think it's probably pretty accurate. That's 7 months ago, the appearance of the first multi-celled organisms on our imaginary timescale. Vertebrates appear about 400 million years ago. That's 4.5 months ago on our imaginary timescale. And 65 million years ago, an asteroid lands on Earth and wipes out the dinosaurs. Now, for big history, that's an incredibly important moment. If that asteroid had been on a trajectory 5 minutes earlier or 5 minutes later, it would have missed the Earth, the dinosaurs would still rule, and we would not be here. So contingency plays a huge role in this story. And that, by the way, happened 3 weeks ago on our imaginary timescale. Now, with dinosaurs out of the way, mammals, who until then were sort of tiny shrew-like creatures, begin to flourish and fill the niches vacated by mammals. And our line, of course, is primates. Now, this is an image of what may have been the first primate, Purgatorius. It lived 3 weeks ago on our imaginary timescale, by the way. This is a very recent reconstruction. It lived about 65 million years ago in absolute time. And it ate fruit and lived in trees. Now, what do you need to survive in trees? Well, you need hands that grip with precision. You need 3D vision. Try jumping through trees without 3D vision. And you need unusually large brains to process the visual information and to handle the motion as well. Does that sound familiar? As a kid, I loved climbing trees. So I always think about this when I think about the first primates. So the primates evolve, and here are our closest living relatives, the chimps. Beautiful, intelligent organisms with an emotional life, I suspect, quite as rich as ours. And then Threshold 6, Homo sapiens from 200,000 years ago. That's 1.5 hours ago on our imaginary timescale, by the way. This is probably the oldest fossil remains of our species. It was found in 2003 at Omo in Ethiopia in the African Rift Valley. Now, why are we so different? What justifies calling this a threshold in big history? The answer, I think, is what I call collective learning. With humans, we get a new, a faster, and a more powerful way of learning. Genes learn, brainy animals learn, but none can learn as fast or as powerfully as us, because we're the first species in 4 billion years that can communicate so efficiently that information begins to accumulate within the community as each individual adds what they have learned to the communal memory. So over generation by generation, the amount of information builds up, and humans as a species learn. And what they learn is how to exploit their environment more and more efficiently. So the result is that we've become the most powerful species on our planet. Now, collective learning is not just a modern thing. It began in the Paleolithic. Here's the range of chimps. Like most animals, chimps stayed within their niche. We have no evidence of significant movements outside their niche. Tiny changes, yes, but no major movements. Here's where humans evolved, somewhere probably in the savanna lands of eastern Africa. And then we begin to get tentative evidence of humans moving into new environments, new niches. Now, each migration means technological creativity, new information about how to exploit new environments. Then from 60,000 years ago, some humans leave Africa. And look at this migration down the south here. To get to Australia, you needed significant navigational skills, and when you got there, you find no animals and plants that are familiar. You have to learn very quickly indeed. And then look at this migration into Ice Age Siberia, not just Siberia, Ice Age Siberia. And I'm sure if I picked you up and put you in Ice Age Siberia, you'd really struggle. There's a lot of technological creativity going on in our Paleolithic history. And this map shows it. 11,000 years ago, our seventh threshold, agriculture. Now, agriculture is an energy revolution. And what really happens is that we acquire a suite of technologies that allow us to divert more of the energy that comes into the biosphere through photosynthesis to our own needs. This is an energy grab by one species. And the more humans get, the less other species get. But as humans get more, oh, that's 5 minutes ago, by the way, on our imaginary timeline. As humans get more, their populations grow, You get towns, you get villages, you get more complex societies, and eventually 5,000 years ago, you get civilizations, towns, cities, and so on. 2.5 minutes ago on our imaginary timescale, just to put this in perspective. And then Threshold 8, today's world in the last 200 years. Again, an energy bonanza. This time it's fossil fuels. And we have a species that can manipulate an entire biosphere. And that happened 5 seconds ago on our imaginary timescale. Okay. So what would an alien make of these lights that just switched on in the last second or two of human history? We can see the acceleration in this map of human population. In the Paleolithic, there's change, we know, but it's very, very slow. Then it speeds up. Collective learning accumulates. There are positive feedback cycles. And then look at this spike in the modern era. This growth in population depends on increasing technological creativity derived from collective learning. And now look at this graph. This is a graph of human consumption of energy, very similar in shape. In the Paleolithic, at the beginning, we did what all other animals do. We took enough resources to support ourselves with a tiny increment for insurance. By the end of the Paleolithic, we're taking a bit more. With the agrarian era, the amount of energy per capita increases until today, we're consuming about 100 times what we need. Now, we know of no other species in the 4 billion-year history of the planet that has done anything like this. No wonder we're having such an impact on our environment. Okay, so here we are, back in the present, after a return journey of 13.7 billion years. And now we're ready to ask, where's it all going? What's the next threshold? Is it endless growth? Is it collapse? Do we get to sustainability in some sense? Our course has prepared us, and I hope it will prepare Daniel and his generation well, to explore these fundamental questions and to think their way through them. So congratulations, you've completed the 10-minute Big History course, and there is no test. That's the good news. So now that we've done the course, and I hope you've got some feeling for what we do in Big History, I'd like to talk very briefly about the Big History project and then about the power of Big History. In 2008, Bill Gates listened to some lectures I'd done on Big History. He likes to listen to lectures while he's on his treadmill. And he listens to lectures all over the place. He's a voracious consumer of lecturers. He loved Big History, saying it put everything together, which of course is what it's designed to do. And he argued that it needed to be taught in high schools as well as in universities. I, of course, agreed, but I had no idea where you begin. He called me. I was in San Diego at the time. He came down, we met, and he proposed we work together to create a free, online Big History course for high school students and independent learners. And that's what the Big History Project is doing. Here's our website. The website at the moment is available only to the pilot schools, but sometime next year, we hope it'll just become available for free for everyone. And this takes you inside. There are 10 basic units. Here you see just the first 6 of them. Inside each unit, there's a mass of wonderful material that my colleagues in Seattle are putting together. It's a beautiful website. And it's got texts, it's got investigations, it's got little video lectures, it's got surveys, it's got assessment tools, all the things a teacher needs. And our pilot teachers are slowly contributing things like lesson plans, ways to teach it in different types of schools. So we're acquiring a lot of information about how to teach it. Now, where are we? We've built a first version of the website, and now we've built a second. That we've trialed it in schools in the States and in Australia. And beginning last September, we're trialing it with a lot more schools in the States and Australia, but also schools in Scotland, Netherlands, Korea, and 1 or 2 other places as well. And we're learning a huge amount from teachers. We want the feedback of teachers and students who will tell us what works and what doesn't. So when we release it, this will have been road tested. It really will know that it works. And this is me at Narara High School, north of Sydney. It was a real buzz for me to see these students because they were clearly excited. And one of the teachers said to me that one of the really fun things about teaching this is that students who'd seemed to be low ability were suddenly coming good because the big story seemed to give them what they needed to engage with their education. At Macquarie University, we're creating an institute that I hope will develop big history as a research project by providing the sort of framework that's very hard to create for scientific research across multiple disciplines, across the sciences and the humanities, across C.P. Snow's Great Divide. And that institute will also, here's a list of some of the themes we might explore. It'll also teach in-service courses and so on. Conclusion. The power of big history. I've been teaching this for 22 years now, and I'm convinced that this, as I've said, is very powerful pedagogical medicine. But why? I think we're reaching a tipping point, and my hope is that big history will take off. In country after country, in schools, I would love to see it take off in Indian schools. And I'll do anything I can to support that process. When it's introduced, it won't displace existing courses. What it'll do, I think, is energize and connect already existing syllabi in a very powerful way. Why does it empower students? Well, it helps them, I believe, achieve what I call deep understanding. And by deep understanding, I mean the sort of understanding that an origin story can give you. Deep understanding arises when we suddenly see how one part of the puzzle fits in with the rest. And it gives you this sort of aha moment. And big history is full of them. Modern education teaches you pieces of the puzzle, maths, history, biology. But by doing so, it can create the terrifying feeling that these silos are endless. Each silo is impossible to master, and they go on forever and ever and ever. And that is really scary. And I think many students have that sort of deep fear of that education goes on forever. What big history can do is give you a sense that there is a perspective from which you can see the whole jigsaw. So you can see how things fit together, even if you don't have a deep understanding of all of the parts, and even if you know some of the pieces are missing. You've got this map of the universe and of knowledge. And I'd like to end with one student's, can I just end with this? This is one student's comment. When I was first asked to consider my role in the universe 4 months ago, I do not think I fully realized there was even a living community around me, never mind an Earth full of other humans and an entire universe beyond. But after this long, incredible voyage of exploration, I have a newfound sense of what the universe is. I have learned that we are all part of the global future, and I can make a difference in my life as well as the lives of others. My role is now to change my ways and respect this beautiful planet that granted us life, and to get others to join me. I should say I've seen that epiphany over and over again in students. So my hope is that big history can inspire students throughout the world and prepare them for the global challenges of the 21st century. I thank you for your attention.